and Merry Christmas. This is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on the world of property, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And we're live every week on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk. And if you're watching on our website, please leave us a Google review. And if you're watching on the socials, get involved in the conversation below. The email address to get in touch is hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. There's a podcast version of the show every Monday at 10 a.m, even over the festive period, and you can get the podcast from the platforms on the other side of the screen. So let's take a seasonal look at property this week with a special plethora of Christmas jumpered property professionals, Joe Joshi, Bob Singh and Guy Charrison. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are watching us, gentlemen.
Oh, I like that bit. And what is that?
What on earth did you do with your screen there?
Oh, just thought I'd show a bit of flash, bit of flash, Harry.
Very good, very good.
Very impressive.
Lovely to see you, Bob and Guy. How's 2024 been for you, gentlemen?
Been a good year all round, and our auction business has been very, very lively. I think everyone's concerned about what's going to happen for next year, but I guess we're going to touch on that during the conversation. But be interesting to hear the others' views.
Bob.
It's been a fantastic year, Paul, especially on the mortgage front and development finance, bridging finance. I think there's no shortage of people wanting to borrow. It's been a really good year.
Well, that leads us very smoothly in. We could have almost rehearsed that in actual fact, because it's got us to our first story, which is about the mortgage market at the moment. Obviously, we have Bob with his expertise with us. The story here says that major mortgage lenders are cutting rates as the year draws to a close. NatWest, Santander and Barclays lowered rates recently, despite expectations the Bank of England will hold its benchmark bank rate steady during its final decision of the year, which of course is this past week. Analysts said that the trend has been triggered by lenders racing to reach their annual sales target, with lower rates expected to continue into the new year. This comes amid an unusually busy December for the property market as buyers rush to complete on the sales ahead of the government stamp duty hike in April. Swap rates have slowly been falling over the past month. The 5-year swap rate is now close to 3.8, with a 2-year at around 4.1. Santander cut rates by up to 0.23% across more than 70 deals, while NatWest lowered its 2- and 5-year products by up to 0.39%. Barclays cut them by 0.14%. So there's an element of competition here, and they obviously want to get into 2025 and start aggressively and strong, Bob. But to what level do you think this is anything to do with what's happened with the budget, etc.? Because we were expecting a second drop potentially, weren't we, with the interest rate?
Yeah, as you know, the Bank of England held rates. The inflation figure came in at 2.6, which is way above the Bank of England target. And for that reason, swaps actually went up on Thursday or Friday. So whilst lenders have been cutting their rates, there is some discontent in the market that the budget wasn't the best as it could have been. It did lead to a slight spike in rates, but it's end of year, so lenders do want to get the figures up for the sort of end of year figures or their targets, and then the same will happen in January, as we see the January sales will then come into play, and the market is expected to be busy definitely in the first quarter for the very reasons you mentioned, Paul, which is the stamp duty is ending for first-time buyers, where at the moment it's £425,000. No stamp duty. That's going to come down to 300,000. So certainly all the people in the south of England will be really, really pressing ahead to finish their deals before the end of March.
And Joe, you've been quite vocal about the fact you think that the government's going to change its mind about this stamp duty change. You still holding firm to your view?
Yes, I think if logic prevails, of course, one would think that first of all they came in with the budget, 70 billion to raise. I think they are not going to meet their expectation at that point, because the idea was that they were going to actually increase lots of employers, more people were going to work, more national insurance contributions are going to start to come in. And I think it's actually had the reverse. Most people are now trying to cut staff. And if there are some staff, they're saying to them, come on a consultancy basis. We don't want to have any more national insurance contributions. So I think that part of it is going to create a problem, which I think they will come back to us in the spring. And they'll say, well, the housing market is what we rely on. Everything else at the moment is all based on the property market development. 1.5 million properties in their tenure of 4 years is a big ask, but they're trying to push it in every direction they can. So it may be that they have to sort of say, well, actually, we're going to continue it for another year or whatever it might happen. It might be last minute in order to keep that momentum going. That may be in the first quarter of next year. In 2025. And so that's why I think that will happen. I also think that obviously they are going to bring in the hike in inheritance tax as well, which they kind of left out on the residential side because they're going to have to raise that money from somewhere else. So I think that's just my view, that I think they're just things that have been kept in the cupboard, thinking, well, if it all goes pear-shaped, we'll bring those things out back in the spring budget.
And Guy, it's great to have you on the show as always, with a view from across the pond, where we regular viewers and listeners to the show will know that that's where you're located. So just give us an idea of whether this behaviour and these sort of figures are being replicated over the States. What's the situation like over there in terms of mortgages and generally about property?
Well, the mortgage rates are still a little on the high side. The interesting thing is, as Bob will know, in the US, when you take a mortgage, it's you get the interest rate for the full term. So it's pretty important where you take it in the cycle. So people, if you're taking a mortgage now and it might be, 5.5%, that's for the full 30 years, which is an average US mortgage. So it's pretty important to get it at the right cycle. So people look to refinance as soon as rates come down. And of course, it's always made me think that people get stuck. So if you borrowed some years ago when you were at say 3%, it's not so easy to borrow now because that's not portable. But generally, the US market is very strong. I mean, I'm active, as you know, mainly in the UK market, but I do have an interest in the US market. Obviously, living here as well. There's something about the American confidence, which I've always found, I've sort of admired more as I've lived here. We're always looking at the negatives, and they're always looking at the positives. I don't know. That's just the psyche of the people, maybe, but it does make a difference in the property market.
Bob, what's your view on having the rate for life?
Sorry, I missed that bit. Sorry, what was that, Paul?
I was just saying, what's your view on having a rate for life, as they do in the States, as Guy explained?
Yeah, it's quite a good idea. We do have now 2 lenders who offer 40-year fixed rates, but I don't think the English public is quite ready for it just yet. I mean, there's no take up certainly from our customer base at all. People don't want to be locked in for that length of time, even though the product doesn't lock you in. Every time you move, you can pay the loan back. It's only when you leave them to go to another lender does the penalty apply with a 40-year fixed rate. So it's quite flexible in that regard. You can take the rate with you if you want to. But I think people don't want to be locked in. I think 5 years is as much as the British public tolerate at the moment. We will be pushing people towards the 5 and 10 year mark as soon as the mortgage rates hit around 3%. And I don't think they're going to come down below that point. So I think when they do come around to say 3%, my advice to my clients is going to be lock in for 10 or 15 years because the upside is more dangerous than the downside.
Yeah, UK Finance has also published its housing and mortgage market forecast for 2025 and 2026, together with projections for 24 full-year numbers. The latest projection comes as mortgage rates are expected to fall below 4% early next year, with 2-year rates likely to follow later in the year. With rate and cost pressures continuing to ease, the outlook for 25 is for gradual improvement in mortgage affordability, feeding into market growth. As interest rates tick down, the UK Finance expects arrears to continue to fall, with tailored forbearance helping those who need it. UK Finance is forecasting that there will be an 11% increase in gross lending, 10% increase in lending for house purchases, and a 30% increase in external remortgaging. So with the affordability getting lower, does this mean that we're going to see an explosion in the number of sales in the year? Are we going to have a strong year, do you think, Bob, factoring in that we've got this stamp duty precipice to fall over?
Yeah, I think we're going to have a very strong year. There's the expectation that base rate will fall at least 3 times in 2025. I think we'll keep the market momentum going, particularly if we have a strong first quarter start, which we are all expecting because of the end of the stamp duty benefit.
What I'll do is I'll ask this both of Guy and also of Joe as well. So here's an interesting point then. If we're going to get more affordability, what's that do to buy-to-let landlords? Because obviously rates will start to fall there. So the figures will start to make a bit more sense. So do we think that perhaps all these landlords who've been selling up this year and getting out have been a bit premature, Guy, firstly?
Well, being a landlord, it should be a long-term investment. So you're supposed to be able to ride out the different market cycles. But I think what certainly happened is that a lot of people have sold. So the stock levels have reduced. People tend to have much longer tenancies than they've ever had before. So that does, both of those things have pushed rents up. And I guess, when you're looking at things, if you had a property rented for £1,000 a month a couple of years ago and suddenly you sold it and now it's sort of £1,300-1,400, you might be thinking, why did I sell that? And then that will encourage people to perhaps stay in the market, or as you say, even enter the market. So it's difficult, but I think it's the balance of all the legislation, and people are when you're renting a property now, you've got to comply with this, you've got to comply with that, and it's a lot of work for the agents. The agents are charging more, so people are always a little nervous of continuing legislation. But on the other hand, we get used to it. So I guess that's the balance.
And that's really the point that Guy's making there, isn't it, Joe? We heard it not so long ago when somebody said to us the trouble with buy-to-let properties is toilets and tenants.
Yes. I think the people that rushed and got out very quickly were the ones that had mortgages that were beginning to be more expensive than the income coming in, number one. Number two, I think there was a lot of low leases and the new EPC compliance that's going to really hit everybody, because lenders are really going to be sticklers. I'm sure Bob will confirm that, for that EPC to be minimum of 3C. Otherwise, that's going to. So all of those other little things were the ones that started to say to people, maybe this is the time for me to cut and get out. But mostly it was about rent against mortgage, because the mortgages went high quickly and the rents were not actually coming in and covering those. So those are it's old stock that needed to be perhaps refurbished, brought up into some sort of standard. And, I personally saw quite a bit of those coming through auction routes where they thought, well, it's a low lease, I'm not going to get the rent. But of course, the yields weren't there. So either had to get it emptied. And as soon as they got it emptied, they would just get out of it and not extend the lease for another 30, 40, 50, 60,000 pounds, whatever that was going to cost them, because that's just their profit going down the pan. So I think that's what really brought those kind of properties into the marketplace. But now that the rates are a little bit more settled and people get used to it, as Guy said, we just get used to it, we move on. They are now coming in with the new rental agreements, and the new rental agreements are obviously at a higher level because the supply and demand kicks in. The demand is high. There's a lot of people that are looking for rental properties. Supply became somewhat limited because people started to jump out. And I think the market is really going to go towards this commercial landlord that is, the Tesco's, the John Lewis's of the world are building pretty heavily now in tandem with government structure in order to make sure that they get maximum out of their land. I mean, we know of a number of big stores, out of town stores, which have loads of land, parking, etc., and they're piling them up. I don't know if anybody's been into Earl's Court recently. As you go over the bridge, the Tesco's there is now having a massive development that was always on the cards, but they're just going to build all around that store in order to provide more lettable accommodation. Two things they do. One is they're providing a good service for the tenants, and secondly, they've got ready-made shoppers on site that kind of come stairs to do their shopping. So I think the whole industry is going to change a little bit.
The interesting thing there is, Joe, that what concerns me is for the people who are, yes, we call subpar tenants, let's just use that phrase, it's going to be increasingly difficult for them to find accommodation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting, I noticed here that UK Finance are saying that they expect lending for house purchases to be 11%, but buy-to-let new lending, 13% increase in the year. So they're seeing that. And I guess the more the interest rate falls back to the low levels it used to be, which means that the option of just putting your money on some kind of deposit, such as an ISA or anything like that, that doesn't make sense anymore. But all the time that rates are at 5-6%, and you can get that in a building society, let's just say, you don't have the toilets and tenants problems, but you still get roughly 5 or 6%. And if you're going to make 7% on your buy-to-let, why do you need to take all that hassle? I mean, Bob, that's the economics of it on a fag packet, isn't it?
That's perfect, yeah, because that's exactly what it is. The surveys told us that the people who have 5, 6, or 7 buy-to-lets already weren't selling. I think it was the amateur landlords who got a bit fed up. Rates were high, they weren't really making much of a profit because of these Section 24 changes. But now, going forward, it's actually good for the government as well, because lower rates mean higher taxable income from landlords. So, the government must be rubbing their hands, expecting rates to fall, because revenues for them in 25, 26, 27 will actually go up from properties. So, so we do expect a significant increase. I've not seen anybody sold because of rates, but that it happened. People did sell, unfortunately.
And Guy, since 2016, there's no doubt about it, the governments of both colours have been looking to, well, one person used the phrase recently, professionalise the landlord industry. And I think that's quite a good way of putting it, because, those people that have gone on to be entrepreneurial and have, a portfolio of, say, a dozen properties, it was mentioned to us not so long ago that a number of those people started with just the one. But the trouble is, there's for every 10 great landlords, there's always one bad apple that, of course, becomes a vote-winning situation for parties of either colour. And there's no doubt about it, since George Osborne in 2016, they've had it in for the accidental landlord, haven't they?
Well, yes, and of course, there was the in the first weeks of the new Parliament, there was the new MP that got caught out for some of his properties not being quite up to standard as well. But it's just difficult. And again, I just want to come back to I can see that the people who are at the bottom of the rental ladder, the ones who are finding it haven't got great references, haven't got great deposits. I think they are going to get squeezed. So again, I'm not keen on legislation, but that's an area where we have to watch that they don't become slum landlords again.
And Joe, there's some truth in the fact, isn't there, that if you invest in your property, then your reward is better quality tenants.
Yes, there is. There's no question about it. It's like anything, really. If you invest well and somebody looks after it. But my view on that, to a large extent, is that unless someone's actually put their hand in their pocket and paid for something, they just never value it in the same way as renting. And experience has shown us, either on my own properties or some of the tenants and landlords that we've had, that there's little care for property. They think, well, it's a short term, I'm here for a while, they got a deposit, if I spilled some tea on that carpet, it wouldn't matter. But I assure you, if that carpet was the one that they paid for out of their own pocket, they'd go bend over backwards to make sure that it was soaked up, cleaned up, and probably had a vax or whatever they call it in there to clean it up. And they go to that extra mile to make sure that it is protected and covered. So yes, of course, the more people invest, the better the property looks, the better the rent, and hopefully the better the tenant. But unfortunately, you don't know that, Paul, until they're in the house. Everybody turns up pretty smart, but unfortunately, they may not all live like that.
I was always taught, the quality of the property will determine the quality of the tenant, and it's obviously true. And I remember being taught when I very first started all those years ago, was when a tenant phones up and says the Hoover doesn't work. What they really mean is the bag is full, come around and empty it. I'm not
Yes.
quite sure whether that's changed a lot and over the years.
No,
Probably hasn't.
I don't think it has. I don't think it has. But
And to that extent, I suppose that's why a lot of people say, well, do you know what, I'm just going to maybe take a couple of % less and stick it in the building society because I don't have the leaky tap brigade, as you call them, Joe.
What I've noticed quite a lot is, and Joe will probably also see this through his auction business, that a lot of people get to a certain age when they want to change. They've been active landlords maybe in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and then into their 60s. But once they get into their 70s and 80s, they're looking things differently. They're looking at the risk, and they just want to get rid of things. So again, that's something to watch out for.
maintaining them becomes a real challenge, and finding tradespeople that they can actually rely on, and perhaps their own system is not as agile as it was. So they're always looking for someone else to try and do something, and that can really eat into it. So they come to a point where they go, you know what, maybe it's time for me to, not change any more
that's absolutely true.
But that's,
So let's just focus on stamp duty for a second then, gents. And we've already heard this year that the market over 500,000 is pretty much stagnant and has been for a while. And obviously, one of the contributory factors many people suspect will be stamp duty. We had an increase in stamp duty, of course, in the budget. Do you think that's just going to make matters worse in 2025? Are we going to continue with this busy, lower starting part of the market and just remain static above 500,000? Bob?
I think it'll carry on, to be honest with you. There's such a big appetite, certainly in West London, Northwest London, for properties. And the reason why it slowed down is because of the 5% additional stamp duty in England, and now Scotland's done 8% additional stamp duty. So I think that has been a big factor in slowing anything over 500. Under 500, I think it's still okay. But because people who are moving don't want to sell their current house, they're the ones inflicted by this additional stamp duty, and they're the ones that are worrying because they now have to pay £40,000 stamp duty on a £500,000 house. And that's a fairly big chunk of change to fork out when you're buying a property, when you're not selling your existing. So I think that let to buy transaction, I think, will actually reduce because people won't want to pay that extra additional stamp duty and then try and claim it back by selling the old house within 3 years and timing it perfectly. It's just not going to happen. So I think that sort of class of buyer will diminish. But I think really the stagnation is above the £1 million mark. We're still seeing a lot of activity between the 500 to a million mark, but anything above, we're not really seeing at all.
That's interesting. And of course, the other thing, Guy, is that there's even more influence, if you like, of stamp duty on the north-south divide, because obviously, the further north you go, the less this becomes a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes a lot of difference. And that's really, as Bob says, when you're having to pay out £40,000 on a £500,000 purchase, and a £500,000 purchase, in West London is probably a 2-bedroom flat, in many areas. And, in the north, that could be a very substantial, nice family home. So it does make a lot of difference for people and probably encourages a lot of people to move out to the regions.
Let's move on to our second point. Sorry, did you want to say something, Bob?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that actually, Paul, because a lot of people who can't afford in West London are actually moving to Leicester, Luton, Bedford, Coventry, Northampton, and buying twice the size of the properties, and they're loving it.
Yeah, it really does make sense, doesn't it? And of course, the further north you go, especially towards the northeast, I mean, it's just crazy, the difference.
You can buy a whole street.
Don't encourage Joe, whatever you do. Anyway, let's move on to our second topic of conversation, and this one's a fascinating one. Obviously, we've got changes coming afoot at the end of the financial year. Parents across the country apparently are racing to pass on the family home to their children in a bid to avoid big inheritance tax bills. This is new, fresh analysis. The number of properties exchanging hands for free is expected to increase by more than 45% to around 220,000 this year, says the Land Registry. But analysis have urged caution over the trend, as homes can still be subject to inheritance tax if families do not adhere to strict stipulations. Roughly 130,000 properties are given away each year, according to the Land Registry data obtained via a Freedom of Information request by Hamptons. In 2023, this number increased to 152,000, but this year projections show it will reach 220,000. So this is because Rachel Reeves amended rules on inheritance tax in her budget, bringing pensions and farms into its scope as well. There's been much publicity about this around, of course, at the moment. Is it wise to give your family home away to your kids, Bob?
Some people are choosing that route purely for the reason of saving on IHT. But we say, look, if you are going to do that, make sure you do understand the 7-year survival rule, because if you pass away within 7 years of gifting that asset, then it comes back into the estate on a pro rata basis. So it may not necessarily achieve the objective if you pass away within 7 years. And there are other ways of doing all this. I think people maybe go for the easy option, which is to give the whole thing away. There are other mechanisms, for IHT mitigation that we can advise clients on. But to give it away is the easy route. And quite often your main residence is the biggest asset in your estate. And if you can get the biggest lump out of the pot, if you like, then all you're left to be taxed with is your portfolio and your pensions. So it's a quick fix, but maybe not the right fix for most people.
Does seem rather unfair, Guy, doesn't it, that the poor old home buyer who's encouraged throughout his life to get his castle and make it his home is then punished doubly, having earned the money in the first place and paid tax on it, and then it's taxed again when it's passed on to the rest of the family for their benefit.
Well, I think that's a story we consistently hear over the years. Everything you're paying tax on, you've already paid it multiple times. It's very difficult, but the fact that you've got to live for 7 years to make it worthwhile. I think there is some taper relief on that, but it's a big ask, and if you're say for example you were 80 years old and you think, well, I've got to live till 87, so you're risking living beyond average life expectancy. What happens if your situation changes and you need to go into accommodation in a nursing home or some sort of, and this, these things are, nursing homes are, you won't find one in the south for £1,000 a week. They're probably all nearer £1,200-1,300 a week. So it's huge amounts of money. And if you've given away your major asset, I'm not quite sure how the revenue would take it if you've given it and you haven't lived the 7 years. I don't know about that. Do you know about that, Bob? That'd be an interesting point.
That also creates a problem, because if you're giving away the main house, the social services can see that as asset deprivation and bring it back into your estate. So you've really got to be careful when you do these sort of things. Do take advice fully.
Yes,
make sure you're healthy.
And Joe, actually, just a little bit of self-promotion for our show. Next week, 29th of December, we have got Tony Gimple from Chancery Law and Tax talking to us on this very subject, haven't we?
We have, yes. It's a big question that's certainly asked of me when I am talking to people, especially if they're selling and they're thinking, well, what's the best route? I suppose I can say that culturally it's a real challenge. It's a mind challenge for most Asian families, because it's just something that they can't get their head around, having worked so hard to achieve something and then to sort of gift it. And there are just so many areas that makes it hard for them to sort of think. They don't understand the system of trust. They don't, the trusts, and they don't understand the system of 7 years sometimes. So, they spend most of their life saving and not wanting to pay tax, and then at the end the taxman still collects because they haven't made any succession plans. So it's a real education, and I think that's where Tony and colleagues of that sort of structure will be great to have on our program going forward in 2025. And obviously we'd love to see Guy and Bob on there more and more, because there has been, and gents, we started this in COVID. Would you believe it's been now nearly 5 years that this program has been running? for every Sunday, consistency, and thanks to Paul with all of his stuff and getting my butt kicked in to make sure I turn up at 10 o'clock every Sunday morning to deal with it is a big ask at my age, and I'm getting to 80 myself now, Guy. Now we just get, or at least I feel
Looking
I
pretty good
feel
on
I'm
it,
getting
Joe.
there. But it's we sustained it, and it's a great thanks to all of you. Would love to see more of you in 25.
Oh, thank you.
I,
Well, it's always fun to join you, and it's always nice chewing the fat with all of you.
I've got one last question to put to you all, and this is kind of a seasonal one for as we're at this juncture of the end of a year and the beginning of another. And I'm going to ask you, I suppose you can copy each other if you want to a certain bit. There is a risk of this, but I'm going to ask you for three things. If you were in charge of property to make it a stellar 2025, what three things? Starting with Bob. Sorry, you're on the step first. But what three things would you do to make property a better place within 12 months if you
For
were in
the
charge?
Well, I think the biggest one has to be it's outside your estate, and you should be able to gift it to your children without any taxes. That'd be a massive hit. I do not like the additional stamp duty. I'd rather have one rate for residential, one rate for investment. So if you're going to penalise those people that are buying investment property, give them a separate rate so they can choose whether or not to pay that, but have a sensible rate for everybody else. And I would probably reduce stamp duty, not stamp duty, VAT down to about 10% because that just adds on so much cost in the leisure industry to everything else. And I think that would be a big saving for the average person.
And of course, that's a big one in terms of home improvements and things like that, because it's not getting a builder in and all the rest of it. But then suddenly there's VAT whacked on at the end, and if you're a private individual, that's a real pain, isn't it? Yeah. Guy, same question to you then. Three things that you do to make property a better place by the end of next year.
Well, sorry to be boring, but the two of them are going to be the same as Bob, which is the stamp duty. I think it's too complicated at the moment and different rates, and then we see properties not increasing in one sector or in one type because they get to the maximum price on the stamp duty. People are trying to fiddle around with that, and inheritance tax. I agree with. Of course, that's been so much in the news with the farmers, and the trouble with politicians is they start with one thing. And then they can't help themselves going further. So I think that's something we should all be more concerned about and looking to find a government that can give us some more confidence on that. But the third thing I would say is planning. I think we're talking about all the planning changes at the moment and what's going to happen. All this sort of are they going to build on grey land, which is a new word they're starting to use. And I think I'd like to see some sort of more grown-up planning policy. At the moment, you can get a decent application that can be stopped by some parish council people who don't understand what they're doing. They don't understand the real the issues. So something a bit more grown up. And I'd like to see personally some cooperation between the political parties and say, let's actually get together, have some understanding of a core idea for maybe a 10 or 20-year policy that they can all get behind, rather than we have a change of government and then everything's changed. Everyone comes up with these huge targets. I mean, how many times have we heard the target of 1.5 million new homes and all this? It never happens, and that's because we haven't got anything that's united and properly grown up. So planning, I would put as my number one probably.
Excellent answers so far. Joe, no pressure.
Thanks for putting me last there, by the way.
Of course.
So one of my pet things has always been that first-time buyers are very, very crucial. It is just the way this system works. I'm sure both Guy and Bob will appreciate in all the years that we've been in property, without the first-time buyer being in the system, it just doesn't happen up the ladder. It's just there. There's no cutting it short. So I think that there should be a good, like in perhaps in India, a good fixed rate return for the elderly at the ages of 50 plus, that the government can say, well, look, stick your money in here for 5 years fixed, and we'll keep them away from the first-time buyers property market, and that will actually speed up the process and give those first-time buyers a good first step to get onto the property ladder. The reason why the elderly came into it is that they had pension money and they had money, but they didn't get a good return on it. So they all started to buy to lets. And before buy to let came in, we as families would buy one in each member's name just to make sure that we sort of accumulated a mass of property. So I would like to see some sort of structure that allowed saga people perhaps to be able to invest their money without having to fix leaky taps, and leave the option for young first-time buyers to get on the first run of the property ladder. My other pet hate is conveyances. If you ever want to have a deal screwed up, give it to a solicitor, and so because that can last forever, and they can argue about one word for about 6 months for no particular reason, and that's extra cost for both first-time buyers and so forth. So, when I do auctions, and of course Guy does auctions, we know that if a legal pack is prepared and done, we know that system can be dealt with very, very quickly. So why it takes so long now, 4 months in some cases, 5 months for a completion on a property, and then so many fall throughs because things change in that period. So I think the conveyancing system definitely would need to be fixed. And of course, what was that?
I would like to add on to that. I think that's a great idea because home improvement packs, I think, should be brought back.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had
Home
some, they
information
just weren't
packs.
sold properly, Bob. They just weren't sold properly. But
Yeah.
if they were dealt with the right way,
Yeah.
and as we have legal packs in auctions, nobody has an argument about it. You can do things much quicker, but it just seems to take so long. So in my opinion, my three things: one is to do something for the elderly, the Grey Brigade, and take them off that bottom run of the ladder and let the first time buyers get on it, because then it steps up easily. Once they get on it, then everybody else can move on it. And second, of course, is conveyancing, and third is the stamp duty taxation. I think it just kills the deal. But that's a share that we all have.
Joe, I was a little
Well-
concerned when you described the elderly as over 50. I think we're all elderly on that basis.
We're all there. We're all there. But what I'm saying is, Guy, that the Saga group with its 50 or 55 is a group that actually would rather go and enjoy their time away with the investment that gives them a return than having to stay at home and think, I've got this leaky tap and this tenant that's going to keep ringing and I've got to phone the agent. I'm just saying we could clear up a whole bunch of issues that were only brought in because they had nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, we must leave it there. That's it. We must wish all of you a Merry Christmas and a prosperous 2025. And of course to you, our viewers and listeners to Property Matters. Have a wonderful Christmas, and we'll see you next week, 29th of December, for another Property Matters special.